I thought I was prepared for my son's funeral. I thought the worst part would be saying goodbye. But the moment I turned to leave, a woman I'd never seen before placed a newborn in my arms and whispered, "He's yours now," before disappearing into the crowd. Since that moment, nothing in my life has made sense. My son never told me he had a child. I never knew the danger that followed. Now I'm uncovering secrets he died protecting, and realizing he didn't leave me with grief. He left me with a family I never saw coming. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The church was colder than I expected, the kind of cold that settles into the wooden pews and clings to your clothes long after you leave. I sat alone in the front row, listening to the pastor recite words that didn't belong to my son. Michael hadn't been a devoted family man, or a pillar of the community. He had been quiet, distant, a young man who stepped further and further out of my reach with every passing year. But the pastor didn't know him, and no one else was here to correct him. No friends, no co-workers, no family other than me. Just a closed casket and a handful of lilies that already looked wilted by the time the service ended. I stayed seated long after the pastor walked out, long after the funeral director began stacking unused programs and folding chairs. I knew I should stand up, walk outside, pick up whatever remained of my life without Michael, but my legs felt fixed to the floor. It wasn't just grief. It was the ache of years wasted, years where I tried calling, texting, reaching, only to hear silence or receive replies that felt like walls. When I finally rose, the church was nearly empty. The air outside was damp and gray, the sky low enough to touch the tips of the surrounding trees. I stepped toward the parking lot, pulling my coat tighter around me. That was when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, uneven, almost frantic. "Ma'am, wait." I turned to see a young woman approaching. Her hair was tied back in a messy knot, her clothes dark and loose, but what struck me first was the bundle she was holding, something small, wrapped tightly in black cloth. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but there was something sharper beneath the tears. Urgency, fear. Before I could speak, she stepped close, too close, and placed the bundle in my arms. I felt the unexpected weight, warm and fragile, and instinctively held it against my chest. Baby. A baby no more than a week or two old, maybe less. His tiny breath brushed against my collarbone, and the black cloth shifted enough for me to see the soft curve of his cheek. "He's yours now," the woman whispered. Her voice was barely a breath. Your son, he wanted you to have him." I stared at her, stunned, unable to form a sentence. My mind scrambled for something rational, something that explained why a stranger had just placed a newborn in my arms at my son's funeral. But before I could ask a single question, who she was, what she meant, what she was running from, she stepped back. "Please," she added, her voice trembling. "Just, please protect him." And then she turned and ran. Not walk. Then. I tried to follow, calling out, but she disappeared past the gravestones, swallowed by the heavy gray fog rolling across the cemetery. I stood alone among the headstones, holding a baby who had begun to fuss softly, as if sensing the chaos he had been born into. My son had died that week. And now, somehow, I was standing in a cemetery with a child pressed against my heartbeat, left behind by a woman who vanished before I even knew her name. I looked down at him, his small fingers curling against the fabric of my coat. "Michael," I whispered into the quiet. "What did you do?" The baby cried the moment I closed the front door behind us, a thin, desperate sound that cut through the stillness of the house. I hadn't heard a baby cry in decades, not since Michael was little, and even then he had been quiet, rarely fussing unless something was truly wrong. This cry was different, raw, frightened, hungry. I carried him into the kitchen, unsure what to do, my hands trembling as I laid him gently on the counter, cushioned by my coat. His tiny fists opened and closed as if reaching for something familiar that wasn't there. I stared at him, feeling a strange mix of awe and terror rise in my chest. Baby. My son's baby. A baby he never spoke about, never hinted at, never allowed me even a glimpse of. Michael had kept many things from me in recent years, where he lived, who he loved, what he feared. But never once did he mention a child. Never once did he say I was a grandmother. I rummaged through drawers with a franticness that surprised even me. Bottles. Formula. Anything. I found nothing except an old tea kettle and some stale crackers. My life was not set up for an infant. I wrapped him more securely in the cloth he came in and drove to the nearest grocery store, praying the short trip wouldn't frighten him further. His cries softened to whimpers by the time we returned home. I held him in one arm and tried to read the instructions on a can of powdered formula with the other. The measurements blurred through my tears. I paused, took a shaking breath and tried again. Warm water, 2 scoops, shake gently. I found a bottle left over from when I used to donate items to the women's shelter. Miraculously unopened. Miraculously needed. The moment the bottle touched his lips, he latched on with a hunger that broke me. He drank greedily, his tiny body relaxing, the knot in his forehead smoothening as he settled against me. I held him until the bottle was empty and then held him longer, unsure which one of us needed the comfort more. When he finally drifted into sleep, I laid him on a folded blanket on the couch and began my search. There had to be something, anything that explained who he was. The young woman had given me no name, no instructions, no hope of finding her again. All I had was the baby and the black cloth. I unwrapped the bundle carefully, searching for notes sewn into the seams, a slip of paper, a hospital wristband, anything. There was nothing but fabric and the faint scent of lavender. His tiny ankle had no bracelet. His onesie was plain, unmarked. His skin held no distinguishing marks except a small birthmark shaped like a teardrop just above his knee. I checked his diaper bag except there was no bag. No spare clothes. No paperwork. No clues. It was as if he had arrived out of thin air. I sank onto the couch beside him, exhaustion settling deep into my bones. I looked at his sleeping face, so peaceful, so unaware of the chaos swirling around him. I traced the soft curl of hair at his forehead, and for a moment I saw Michael there. Not the distant man he grew into, but the boy who used to run barefoot across the backyard, laughing so loudly it made the neighbors smile. I realized then that my son had lived a life far from mine, a life filled with secrets I never imagined. And somewhere in that hidden world, he had created this child, this innocent life now depending on me. I leaned back, closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet room. What were you hiding, Michael? And why did you trust me with the one thing you kept secret from everyone else? In the quiet of the living room, with the baby asleep beside me, my mind drifted back to the last month of Michael's life. Those strange, uneasy weeks when every instinct in me knew something was wrong, though he insisted everything was fine. I had replayed our final conversations countless times since his death, but now they took on a new shape, a new weight. Every clipped sentence, every sudden change in subject, every refusal to let me visit felt like puzzle pieces I had been too grief-stricken to assemble. But holding his child in my arms made everything sharper, more urgent. He had called me 4 weeks before he died. The call lasted barely a minute. I remember because I sat on the porch afterward with the phone still in my hand, confused and unsettled. "Hey, Mom," he had said, voice low, distracted, as if he were speaking while watching something else. "Just checking in." Checking in. Those words used to mean he was lonely, that he wanted company. But that day they sounded like obligation, a box he needed to tick. "Are you all right?" "Yes." "You sound tired." "Just busy," he replied quickly. "Work stuff." "What kind of work stuff?" Then, "Mom, I don't want to get into details. I'm fine." He had never shut me out like that when he was younger. Even at his most stubborn, he eventually let me in. But that month, every question I asked seemed to push him further away. 2 weeks later I called him. The moment he answered, I knew he was somewhere he didn't want me to know about. The noise in the background, hushed voices, perhaps even a baby's small cry, made him abruptly say, "Hold on," and muffle the receiver. When he came back on the line, his tone was sharp. "Mom, I can't talk. Don't call for a bit. I'm dealing with something important." "Is it dangerous?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "No," he said too quickly. "Just complicated. Let me come see you." "No," he said again, firmer this time. "Not now." Stung then the way he said it. As if my presence was a threat. As if my love could somehow cause harm. But now, looking at the sleeping baby, I wondered if he hadn't been trying to protect me, but rather the tiny life he was sheltering. Had he been hiding? Running from someone? Was he shielding the baby from danger he didn't know how to escape? And did he refuse my visits because he didn't want anyone tracing me back to him? A week before he died, he left a voicemail. His voice was shaking. I had saved it, replayed it, cried over it. But tonight, hearing it again with the baby in my arms, it meant something different. "Mom, I need a little more time. Things are happening fast. If anything happens to me." The message cut off abruptly. I had always assumed the call dropped or he changed his mind about saying something emotional. But what if he had been interrupted? What if he had been stopped? I turned toward the infant, curled on his side, one small hand resting on the blanket. Michael's baby. Michael's fear. Michael's secret. I pressed a hand against my chest, feeling the heaviness of it all settle in. He hadn't pushed me away because he didn't care. He had pushed me away because he was trying to keep something safe. And now that something was sleeping in my living room, trusting me with a life my son had fought to protect alone. The next morning, after a night of little sleep and too many questions, I placed the baby in the crook of my arm and examined the tiny plastic bracelet I had slipped off his ankle hours before. It was the only thing that resembled a clue. The band was pinkish from wear, the writing slightly smudged but still legible enough to make out the hospital name and a string of numbers. No mother's name. No father. Just baby boy and the date. Only 4 days before Michael's funeral. 4 days. My son had been alive when this child was born. The thought stayed with me as I packed the diaper bag I bought at midnight and drove to the hospital printed on the bracelet. The baby slept most of the way. His small breaths steady and soft. Envied that peace. My own chest felt tight with dread by the time I walked through the automatic doors and approached the reception desk. The nurse at the counter was a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes. When I handed her the bracelet, she looked at it carefully, then at me, then at the sleeping infant in my arms. "You must be the emergency guardian," she said slowly, recognition flickering across her face. The words startled me. No one outside that cemetery should have known anything. "Can you tell me what happened?" "Yes." She hesitated, glancing around before lowering her voice. "I remember the mother. She came in alone. No bags, no phone, nothing. She was terrified, kept looking over her shoulder as if someone might walk through the doors at any moment. The baby was born early and fast." My arms tightened instinctively around the little boy. "Did she give her name?" "She refused," the nurse replied. "Said it wasn't safe." I tried to steady myself. "Was my son with her?" Her face softened. "Only once. He came the morning after the birth. He didn't stay long. He signed one form and left." He seemed on edge. Protective. Protective. The same word echoed through my memory of those last phone calls. His clipped urgency. His refusal to let me see him. "Is there a father listed on the birth certificate?" "Yes." The nurse shook her head. "No. That section is blank." She hesitated. "But there is something else." She disappeared into a back room and returned with a clipboard. On it was a certified copy of the birth record. My hands trembled as I scanned the document. Mother, not provided. Father blank. Emergency guardian. There, written in blue ink, familiar, slanted, unmistakably his, was my full name. My son had written it himself. The room grew still around me. The fluorescent lights hummed quietly. Somewhere down the hall a baby cried, but the sound felt far away. "He told us," the nurse said softly, "that if anything happened to him, the baby should go to you. He was very clear." I lowered my gaze to the tiny boy in my arms. His eyelids fluttered in sleep, unaware of the weight his existence carried. My throat tightened as the truth settled like a stone in my chest. Michael had known he was in danger. He had known he might not survive whatever he was entangled in. And his final act, his last certainty, was making sure this child found his way to me. I felt tears sting my eyes, not just for the baby, not just for the woman who had run through the cemetery with desperation in her voice, but for my son. For all the things he had carried alone. For all the secrets he had borne in silence to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. "Thank you," I whispered hoarsely, my voice cracking. As I stepped out of the hospital into the cold morning air, the birth certificate pressed to my chest, I felt something shift inside me. Grief mixed with purpose. Fear tangled with clarity. Whatever life Michael had lived apart from me, whatever danger he had faced, his child was now mine. And I would protect him with a fierceness my son had never allowed himself to accept. The scar was the only thing I had. A thin, pale line running from the young woman's left cheekbone to the corner of her jaw. A mark that should have made her easy to recognize. Yet she had vanished from the cemetery as if the fog had swallowed her whole. For 2 days, I stared at the birth certificate, at my son's slanted handwriting, at the bundle of black cloth she had wrapped around the baby. None of it told me who she was. None of it explained why she ran. But the fear in her eyes, the urgency in her voice, that did. She was hiding, running from something or someone. And whatever had driven her to my son had now driven her straight into the shadows. I couldn't sit still knowing so little. So I bundled the baby, placed him gently into a carrier against my chest, and began my search where people in danger often end up. The local women's shelter. When I walked into the lobby, the volunteer at the front desk gave me a long, assessing look before speaking. "Can I help you?" I described the young woman. Dark hair, slender, a scar on her left cheek, terrified eyes. The volunteer's expression shifted. Interest, recognition, then caution. "We see a lot of women with scars," she said carefully. "Was she hurt recently?" "I don't know," I admitted. "She handed me her baby at a funeral and disappeared." The woman behind the desk blinked, her professional calm cracking just a bit. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "A woman came in last week who might match your description. She was bruised, jumpy. Didn't stay long. Do you know her name?" "No. She didn't register." She was afraid of someone." That answer was enough to make my stomach twist. I thanked her and walked out, the baby warm and quiet against my chest. The shelter lead didn't give me certainty, only more questions. Who was she running from? Why had Michael been involved? And why had she trusted me? Someone who didn't even know she existed. My next stop was the community clinic near the bus station. The nurse at the front desk frowned in thought when I mentioned the scar. "Yes," she said slowly. "She came in 2 weeks ago. Thought she might be in labor. She left before we could help her." The nurse's frown deepened. She kept asking if anyone had followed her. Another fragment. Another confirmation of danger. From there, I went to the apartment building on 5th Street, the one the clinic nurse mentioned she'd run toward. The manager, an older man with a coffee-stained shirt and tired eyes, leaned against the doorway as I described her. "I've seen her," he said. "Stayed with a tenant on the 3rd floor for a week. Then left in a hurry. Looked scared out of her mind." "Do you know the tenant's name?" "Moved out yesterday," he replied. "Didn't leave a forwarding address." Again, answers wrapped in more questions. By late afternoon, my legs ached, and the baby grew restless, fussing softly as if picking up on my worry. I sat on a bus stop bench, rocking him gently, my breath fogging in the cooling air. People around us came and went, each face one I scanned instinctively for that scar, for that familiar urgency. But she was nowhere. It struck me then, an unsettling realization settling in my bones. She wasn't just hiding from danger, she was hiding from being found. Even by the one person her child had been entrusted to. Even by the mother of the man who helped her. Every door I knocked on, every person I asked, every place she had touched briefly told the same story. She moved like someone being hunted. And somewhere in the middle of all that running, she made a desperate choice. To place her baby, the one thing she couldn't protect, in my arms. I looked down at the sleeping child. His tiny hand curled against my shirt. My voice trembled as I whispered, "We'll find her. Somehow we will." But as the sun dipped behind the buildings and the street lamps flickered on, I couldn't ignore the truth rising inside me. Every answer I found only deepened the mystery. And the most terrifying question of all was the one I still couldn't ask out loud. What kind of danger had my son died trying to shield them from? By the fourth day, exhaustion tugged at every part of me, but the fear of not knowing kept me moving. I had searched shelters, clinics, and buildings, but every thread slipped through my fingers. I needed someone who had known Michael in those final months, someone he trusted enough to let close. Only one name came to mind, someone I hadn't spoken to in years but who had once been like a second son to me. Devon. He answered the door with surprise and something that looked like guilt tightening his features. He had grown older, heavier around the edges, but his eyes were the same, warm, troubled, too honest to hide something for long. When he saw the baby strapped to my chest, his breath caught. "God," he whispered. "He really did it." The words hit me like a blow. "You knew," I said quietly. "Devon, please. I've been walking in circles for days. Tell me what my son was involved in." He stepped back and motioned for me to enter. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and paint thinner, and sketches covered the far wall. Devon's art, something he and Michael used to do together when they were boys. He gestured for me to sit on the couch, then paced the room with his hands on his head. "I knew something," he said finally. "Not everything. He didn't want me involved." "Then tell me the part he did share." Devon sank into an armchair and rubbed his palms against his jeans. "It started months ago. He met a woman, quiet, nervous, always looking over her shoulder. He found her crying outside his building one night. Something bad had happened. She wouldn't give details, but..." His jaw tightened. "But the man she'd been with wasn't someone you walk away from." My pulse quickened. "You mean dangerous?" "Worse," Devon said. "Connected. Controlling. Violent. Michael told me she had bruises she tried to hide." The image hit me harder than I expected. My son helping a terrified, wounded stranger, taking on a fight that wasn't his. But that's who he had been, even when he kept me out. He couldn't walk away from someone in pain. "The baby?" Yes. Devon nodded slowly. "Her pregnancy made everything harder. She didn't have a doctor, didn't have a home. She was living out of borrowed rooms. Michael kept bringing her groceries, blankets, burner phones. He tried to get her into a shelter, but she said the man would find her." I swallowed, remembering the tremble in her voice at the funeral, the way she clung to the baby as though every second counted. "She went into labor early," Devon continued. "Stress, I guess. Michael called me that night, panicked. He said she was bleeding and crying and terrified to go to the hospital because the man might track her. But they went anyway. He stayed with her until morning." My breath caught. "And then he changed," Devon said. "He was scared all the time, jumping at sounds, checking his phone constantly. He told me he had to keep the baby safe. He wouldn't tell me why. Just that he had to." My stomach tightened. "Did he say he was in danger?" Devon nodded, eyes darkening. "Yes. He said someone was watching. Or following. He wasn't sure. And then he died," I whispered. Devon looked away. "The police said it was an accident. But Michael didn't have accidents. Not like that. Not the week he was constantly looking over his shoulder." The baby stirred against my chest, letting out a soft whimper. Devon leaned forward, his voice quiet but unwavering. "He trusted you," he said. "More than anyone. That's why he wrote your name. That's why she brought the baby to you. Michael knew he was running out of time." Tears blurred my vision. I pressed my cheek against the baby's head, breathing in the faint scent of powder and milk. Devon's voice cracked. He died trying to protect them, Ms. Harris. He died for something he thought was worth saving. And in that moment I realized the truth swelling painfully inside me. My son hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't pushed me away out of indifference. He had been fighting a battle alone, one he believed would cost him everything. And now the life he had died protecting was sleeping softly against my heart. The baby had just fallen asleep in my arms when the knocking started. Sharp, frantic, desperate. It rattled the front door so violently that for a split second I thought someone was trying to break it down. My heart lurched into my throat. It was nearly midnight, the neighborhood silent, the kind of silence that makes every unexpected sound feel dangerous. I held the baby tighter and rose carefully, every step cautious, my breath trapped somewhere between my ribs. The knocking grew louder. A voice followed, strained, quivering, almost breaking apart. Please, please open the door. Please. I recognized it instantly. That desperate tremble. That edge of fear. The woman from the funeral. I unlocked the door with shaking hands, pulling it open only halfway at first. She was standing on my porch, barely upright. Her hair was tangled, soaked from the rain, plastered to her face. A dark bruise bloomed across her cheek, and the scar, the same one I'd memorized, was swollen and red. Her clothes were torn in places, her arms scraped and trembling violently. The moment she saw the baby in my hold, her knees buckled. Oh, thank God," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand but stopping short, almost afraid she wasn't allowed to come closer. Tears spilled freely down her face. I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have left, he said he was coming, he said he would take him." She swayed dangerously, and instinct took over. I grabbed her arm and pulled her inside before she collapsed on the threshold. She stumbled into the living room and dropped to her knees on the rug, her hands covering her face as sobs ripped through her. I crouched beside her, still cradling the baby, who began to fuss, sensing the tension around him. She looked up quickly, fear flooding her expression as she reached shaky fingers toward him. "Is he okay? Please tell me he's okay. I've been running for 2 days. I couldn't go back." He was there, he was waiting, I knew he'd take him, I knew he'd hurt him, I didn't know where else to go. Her words tumbled out in broken pieces, barely stitched together by breath. She moved as if ready to collapse entirely, her body folding into itself with exhaustion. "He's okay," I whispered, guiding her to sit against the couch. "He's safe. You both are safe now." She let out a sob so raw it cut straight through me. She reached out, hesitant at first, and softly touched the baby's foot with the tips of her fingers, as though afraid she might hurt him. Her touch lingered there, trembling. "I didn't mean to leave him with you like that," she whispered. I didn't have time. He was coming. He said he'd find us. I knew Michael would want him safe. And you were the only person who didn't know him. He couldn't track you. That's why." Her voice cracked into silence. The name, Michael, hit me with a force that made my throat tighten. Hearing her say it, knowing she had known him intimately enough to trust him with her life, shook something deep in me. I sat beside her, rocking the baby gently. "What happened to you?" Her head dropped as though she couldn't hold its weight anymore. "I tried to disappear after the funeral. But he found me. I think he followed someone from the cemetery. He grabbed me." She swallowed hard, her voice little more than breath. "I thought he'd kill me. I really did." The bruise, the torn clothes, the shaking, it all made a horrifying kind of sense. "You're safe now," I said again, though part of me feared it wasn't entirely true. Whoever she was running from wasn't going to stop easily. She looked at me with eyes swollen from crying, full of fear and something else too. Trust, fragile but desperate. "Please let me stay. Just for tonight. I can't run anymore. I can't leave him again." Her body slumped forward then, not dramatically, but with the quiet collapse of someone whose strength had finally run out. I shifted quickly, catching her shoulders before she slid to the floor completely. The baby whimpered, startled by the movement. For a moment, the house felt suspended between terror and tenderness, The broken young mother collapsed against my living room rug, the child she had nearly lost breathing soft, rhythmic breaths against my chest. I held him tighter and whispered to her, though she was already drifting into unconsciousness. "You're not running anymore. We're here. And whatever happens next, we face it together." She slept on my couch for nearly 12 hours, her body finally giving in after what must have been days of fear and running. The baby slept in the bassinet I'd bought, waking only for feedings, calm now that the storm around him had quieted. When she finally opened her eyes, blinking at the morning light with confusion and dread woven together, the first thing she whispered was, "Where's my son?" I pointed to the bassinet beside the couch. Her face softened at the sight of him, her hand trembling as she reached out to brush the blanket near his tiny feet. For a long time she didn't speak at all. Her gaze simply rested on him as if memorizing every detail, as if she believed he might disappear the moment she blinked. I sat across from her, waiting, giving her the space to breathe. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were swollen with exhaustion and something deeper, shame. "My name is Alina," she whispered, voice brittle. "I know you've been looking for me." "I have," I said gently. "I needed to understand. I needed to know why you trusted me with him." She closed her eyes, inhaling shakily. "Because there was no one else left." For the next few moments, silence filled the room, thick enough to wrap itself around us. She held her hands together so tightly her knuckles went white. Then, slowly, painfully, she began. "The baby's father isn't Michael," she said, choking on the words as if they hurt coming out. "His name is Leon. And he isn't someone you leave. Not alive, anyway." The air thinned around us. She kept her eyes on the wall, unable to meet mine. "I met him 2 years ago. He was charming at first. Gentle. He made me feel safe in a way I had never felt before." Her breath shuddered. "But it changed so fast. He controlled everything, my clothes, my phone, my friends. When I got pregnant it got worse. He said the baby was going to be raised his way. That I belonged to him." She touched the bruise on her cheek, fingertips trembling. "I ran when I was 8 months along. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't let my child grow up under him. I hid in shelters, basements, with strangers. I was terrified he'd find me." Her eyes filled again. "And then I met Michael." Hearing my son's name spoken with such emotion made something in my chest ache. "He found me outside a grocery store. I was crying and trying to figure out how to buy food without him tracking my card. Michael, he helped me. He didn't even ask questions at first. He just saw someone who needed help." A tear rolled down her cheek, more quiet than sobbing now. Just grief, plain and honest. "He let me stay at his place for a while. He helped me get prenatal vitamins, food, blankets. He bought a second-hand stroller and carried it 6 blocks home like it weighed nothing." Her mouth tightened. "He knew what Leon was capable of. He told me he'd seen men like him before, men who didn't stop until they owned everything." I felt my breath catch, thinking of Michael moving through a life I had never seen, helping someone who'd been hunted, taking on a danger he never should have faced alone. When I went into labor early, he was the one who rushed me to the hospital. Her eyes flicked to the baby. "He held my hand the entire time. I don't know what I would have done without him." A tremor moved through her voice as she continued. "But Leon was getting close. Too close. Michael told me he'd figure out a way to protect the baby no matter what happened to him." She swallowed hard. "He said you were the only person he trusted." The weight of that landed like a stone in my chest. I felt it settle deep. "When Michael died," she whispered, breaking apart again, "I had no idea what to do. I knew the funeral would be the one place Leon wouldn't dare show up. Too many people. Too many eyes. It was the only moment I could get the baby somewhere safe without being followed." "So you brought him to me," I said softly. She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I didn't want to leave him. I didn't want to leave at all. But I thought maybe with you he'd be safe. Safe in a way I couldn't give him." The baby stirred, making a small sound. She reached for him, hesitant, reverent, her fingertips brushing his cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything. For running. For putting him in danger. For dragging your son into my nightmare." I stood, moved closer, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You didn't drag him into anything," I said. "Michael chose to help you. He chose to protect you both." She broke then, shoulders trembling, her face buried in her hands as tears flowed freely. And in that moment, as the baby murmured softly between us, I realized something with absolute clarity. My son had died trying to save them. And now, the weight of that choice was resting in my living room. Fragile, scared, and desperately needing someone who wouldn't run. The days that followed were quiet in a way that made me uneasy, as if the world were holding its breath. Alina moved slowly around the house, still bruised, still jumpy at every unexpected sound. The baby slept in the bassinet near my bed now, waking every few hours with soft whimpers, and each time I soothed him, I felt the weight of my son's handwriting on that birth certificate pressing against my heart. I had begun to imagine, foolishly, that maybe the worst was behind us. That maybe the danger had burned itself out the night Alina collapsed into my living room. But on the fourth morning, just as I was putting the kettle on, a firm knock sounded at the front door. Polite, steady, official in a way that instantly tightened the air in the house. Not frantic like Alina's arrival. Not uncertain like a neighbor. This knock carried confidence, authority, expectation. Alina stiffened in the doorway to the kitchen, her face draining of color. The baby stirred in his carrier on my chest, sensing the tension. "Stay here," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if anywhere was safe. I opened the door only a few inches. Two men stood on the porch, clean-shaven, neatly dressed, clipboards in hand. They wore the kind of polite smiles meant to disguise something colder underneath. "Morning," the taller one said. His tone was friendly, but his eyes were sharp in a way that made my skin prick. "We're from Child Services. We're doing routine follow-ups on infants born without proper identification." My heart thudded painfully. Routine follow-ups didn't happen at home. Not without appointments. Not without paperwork. Not without names. But they didn't offer names. The second man leaned forward slightly, eyes sweeping over my shoulder. "We'd just like to ask a few questions. Make sure no newborn is being cared for in an unsafe environment." His gaze lingered too long on the hallway behind me, as if expecting to see someone hiding there. I tightened the door only an inch wider, enough to block his line of sight. "I'm sorry," I said calmly. "You must have the wrong home. I don't have any children here." The taller man's eyes slid down to the carrier on my chest, where the blanket hid most of the baby's face. "Then who's that?" "A friend's child," I answered without hesitation. "She dropped him off while she's at work." A lie, but smooth, practiced, not because I had experience lying but because fear had a way of sharpening instincts. One man scribbled on his clipboard. "We'd like to confirm that. May we come in?" "No," I said firmly. "Not without proper identification." The two men exchanged a brief glance. Quick, meaningful. The kind of glance shared between people operating under a different truth than the one they were offering. The taller one pulled a badge from his pocket. It looked official enough, but something about it felt off. Too clean, too new, the design slightly outdated. I had worked in administration long enough to spot details that didn't fit. "I'll make a call to verify this," I said, keeping the door nearly closed. "That won't be necessary," he replied quickly. Too quickly. His partner stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you have a newborn inside." "I don't," I said again, sharper this time. "And unless you have a warrant, this conversation is over." For a long moment, neither man moved. They simply stared at me, their expressions shifting ever so slightly. No longer polite, no longer pretending. The taller one tilted his head, studying me with a quiet hostility that sent a chill through me. Then, just as suddenly, both men stepped back. "Have a good day," the shorter one said, though there was nothing polite left in his tone. They walked down the steps but not away. They lingered near the car longer than they needed to, speaking in low voices, glancing back at the house as though committing every detail to memory. Only after several minutes did they finally drive off. I locked the door the moment they were out of sight. My hands were shaking. Alina emerged from the hallway, holding herself as if her bones might fall apart. "Were they a him?" "No," I whispered. "But they were looking for you." Her breath hitched, a small sound of terror escaping her lips. She pressed a hand to her bruised cheek, trembling. "He's not done," she whispered. "He'll keep sending people. He won't stop until he has his son." I held the baby closer to my heart. And in that moment, the quiet fear that had been trailing us since the funeral crystallized into certainty. The danger hadn't passed. It was just beginning. After the men left, the house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a hiding place. Not quite safe, not quite exposed, suspended somewhere in a dangerous in-between. I double-checked the locks, then the windows, then the back door, knowing full well that locks wouldn't stop a man determined to reclaim something he believed belonged to him. The baby slept against my shoulder, small breaths warming the curve of my collarbone, unaware of the storm gathering around him. Alina sat at the edge of the couch, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her own pieces together. Her eyes were fixed on the front door even though it was locked, as if she half expected the men to return and break it down. A bruise near her jaw had begun to darken, bleeding purple into her skin. She hadn't spoken since I shut the door. Not a word. Not even a whisper. I sat beside her slowly, careful not to startle her. "They're gone," I murmured. "That doesn't mean anything," she whispered back, her voice barely audible. "He sends people when he can't come himself. He wants to see how close he is. How scared I am." Her hands shook uncontrollably. I reached out, but she flinched before catching herself, offering a small, apologetic tilt of her head. The baby stirred slightly at the movement, then settled again, tiny fingers curling into my blouse. "I can't leave," Alina said suddenly, the words spilling out all at once. "Please. Not yet. I don't have anywhere else to go. I don't have money or a car or papers. I don't even have shoes that can get me further than a few miles." Tears gathered at the corners of her swollen eyes. "I know staying puts you in danger. I know it's not fair. But if I leave, he'll take my son. And if he takes him, I'll never see him again." The room fell still. Her words hung between us like a held breath. Part of me understood the weight of her plea instantly. Another part, the older, cautious part, felt the tremor of fear rise sharply. Allowing her to stay meant placing myself in the path of a man violent enough to track her across cities. It meant painting a target on my home. Me. On the baby. On a life already shaken by grief. But then I looked down at the child resting in my arms, at the soft rise and fall of his tiny chest, at the way he instinctively nudged closer to warmth, to safety. He wasn't just a baby. He was Michael's last act of love, the final thing he fought to protect, the son he never lived to raise, the life he pushed toward me even in his final days. And now that life was staring at me with wide, trusting eyes, he didn't yet know how to focus. My heart already knew the answer long before my mind caught up. "I can't send you back out there," I said quietly. "Not like this. Not alone." Alina's face crumpled in relief so profound it pained me to witness. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to hold back sobs, but they came anyway. Raw, shaken, grateful. I placed a hand gently on her back, guiding her closer, not to collapse into me, but so she could feel she wasn't drifting alone anymore. "You can stay," I continued, my voice stronger now. "Both of you. For as long as you need. But he might come," she whispered. "Then we'll be ready." She looked at me for the first time since the knocking. Really looked. Her expression was a blend of disbelief and a kind of aching hope. "Why would you do this for us?" I glanced at the baby. "Because my son did. Because he believed you were worth saving. And because this little boy, he deserves a chance to grow up without fear. A tear slipped down her cheek. I won't let anything happen to him. I promise. And I won't let anything happen to either of you, I said, surprising even myself with the firmness in my voice. The baby stirred, stretching tiny fingers toward Alina's trembling hand. He didn't know the danger. He didn't know the sacrifice. He only knew the two people who held him. And in that moment, a quiet choice settled into my bones, not one born of bravery, but of something deeper. Not fear, not obligation, but love. I had already lost my son. I would not lose his legacy too. The next morning, after Alina had fallen back to sleep on the couch with the baby tucked against her chest, I found myself standing in front of the boxes I had brought home after the funeral. They'd been sitting untouched in the corner of my bedroom, silent, heavy reminders of a life I never fully understood. I hadn't been ready to face them before. But now, with danger pressing in on us from every side, I knew I had to try. Somewhere inside those boxes, my son had left pieces of the truth, pieces I had ignored for too long. I sat on the floor and pulled the first box toward me. It held clothing, a few books, a cracked phone case, a nearly empty bottle of cologne. Things without explanations. Things without meaning unless someone told you the story behind them. I sifted through them slowly, hoping something in the mundane would give me answers. Nothing. The second box held paperwork, receipts, old bills, pay stubs. None of it useful. I reached for the third box, smaller, battered around the edges. It was taped shut, almost sloppily, as though Michael hadn't expected anyone to open it. My breath tightened. Something about the box felt different. Too light, too carefully forgotten. I peeled the tape back and opened the lid. Inside, under a folded sweatshirt, lay a sealed envelope with my name written across the front. My full name. My mother's name, not just Mom. The way he wrote it when he was being serious or when he wanted me to pay attention. The handwriting stopped my breath. Sharp, slanted, unmistakably his. For a long moment, I just held it, my fingers trembling around its edges. Then I broke the seal. The letter was short, only a few lines. But it carried the weight of everything he never said to me while he was alive. If anything happens to me, take care of them. It's the only good thing I've done in years. Don't look for me. Don't ask questions. Just keep them safe. Please. Michael. I read it once. Then again. And again. My vision blurred until the words smudged into black streaks across the page. My throat tightened, and for the first time since the funeral, since the baby, since the knocking, since the men at the door, I broke. Not quietly. Not gracefully. But with the raw kind of grief I had kept buried for years. He had been slipping from me long before death took him. I had mourned the distance, the silence, the gulf widening between us that no phone call ever seemed to bridge. I told myself he didn't need me anymore, that he had chosen a life without me, that I had somehow failed him. But this letter, these few desperate lines, told a different story. He wasn't pushing me away. He was protecting me by staying away. He wasn't indifferent. He was terrified. And in his fear, in his final days, he had thought of me not as an inconvenience, not as a faded part of his life, but as the only person he trusted to save what he could not. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears soaking the paper as I whispered his name over and over, the way I used to when he was a little boy who scraped his knees or had nightmares. Except now the ache was deeper, sharper. It reached into places inside me I thought had long gone numb. For the son I thought I had lost years before. For the man he became in the shadows, carrying burdens he never let me see. For the child he entrusted to me with his final breath of hope. I wept for all of it. When the tears finally slowed and I lifted my head, the house was still silent. But something inside me had shifted. The fear was still there. The danger was still real. But beneath it, something steadier grew, something that felt like resolve. Michael had chosen me, and I would not fail him now. The evening had been ordinary in the quiet, uneasy way our days had settled. I was washing bottles in the sink while the baby slept in the crib we'd set up in my room. Alina was folding laundry in the living room, pausing every few minutes to listen for footsteps outside. Even in safety, she moved like someone expecting a hand to grab her from behind. The house had become a fragile bubble, warm on the inside, surrounded by shadows. Then the pounding began. Not a knock, not a hesitant tap. A violent, shaking blow against the front door that made the pictures on the wall rattle. Alina froze, the shirt in her hands slipping to the floor. "Open the door," a voice barked. A man's voice. Angry. Too familiar for Alina to pretend she didn't recognize it. My heart surged painfully against my ribs. I stepped in front of her instinctively, even though the door was still closed. The pounding continued, harder now. "Alina, I know you're in there. Open this damn door." Another voice joined him. Lower, colder. "You can hand her over. No one needs to get hurt." Alina backed into the corner. Her hands pressed to her mouth as a sob escaped through her fingers. "No, no, no, he found me, he." "Stay behind me," I whispered. "Don't move." She shook her head violently, tears spilling down her cheeks. "If he gets in, if he gets the baby, he'll take him. He'll take him and I'll never see him again." The door shook again under the force of a boot. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling, but before I could dial, another voice sounded. Sharper, closer, and coming from the walkway outside. "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Back away from her door." It was my neighbor, Mr. Griffin, a retired Marine with a limp and a voice that could cut through concrete. He lived 2 houses down and watched everything from his porch like a hawk. "This is a private matter," one of the men snarled. "Stay out of it." "You're pounding on a woman's door like you're trying to break in," Griffin shot back. "I'm calling the police." The men hesitated, just a flicker, but it was enough. From inside, we could hear the unmistakable sound of Mr. Griffin already on the phone with 911. His voice calm and authoritative as he reported an attempted forced entry. The men exchanged quick words, low and urgent. Then the quieter one hissed, "We'll be back." Footsteps retreated, fast and angry. Car door slammed. Tires screeched. Only when the street fell silent again did I realize I'd been holding my breath. I locked the door, then locked it again, even though it didn't feel like enough. Alina collapsed onto her knees, sobbing into her hands. "They won't stop, he won't stop. He'll keep coming until he gets what he wants." I knelt beside her, pulling her into my arms as she shook. "You're safe. You're safe right now." "No," she whispered. "Not unless I disappear. Or unless I fight. But if I run again, he'll chase me. And if I stay, he'll find me. I don't know what to do." Neither option was safe. Neither option was fair. But what happened at the door made one thing painfully clear. Pretending we could hide was no longer an option. The threat wasn't abstract anymore. Had a voice. It had hands. And it was willing to break down my door to get to her. The baby's cry suddenly carried down the hallway. Sharp, frightened, as if he somehow sensed the tension. Alina staggered toward the sound, gathering him into her arms, holding him close, rocking him like she could shield him with sheer love. The sight broke something in me all over again. I stood behind her, placing a hand gently on her back. "We're going to figure this out," I murmured. "But you can't go back. Not to your old life. Not to him." She nodded slowly, her tears dampening the baby's blanket. "So what does that mean?" she whispered. "It means," I said softly, "we fight. Not in the dark. Not alone. Legally. Publicly. With protection. With witnesses. With the truth." Her eyes lifted to mine. Terrified, hopeful, exhausted. "And if the system fails me?" she asked. "Then it doesn't fail alone," I answered. "It fails both of us." She hugged the baby closer, burying her face against his tiny shoulder. Outside, the street was quiet again. But inside, the truth had settled like an unmovable weight. There was no going back. Only forward. And forward meant war. The courthouse felt colder than any winter morning I had ever lived through. The kind of cold that seeped through clothes, through skin, into the bones. Everything echoed. The footsteps on the marble floor, the rustle of papers, the low murmurs of strangers waiting for their cases to be called. I held the baby against my chest, his cheek warm against my collarbone. His breath a small reminder that this wasn't just a legal proceeding. This was survival. This was the last line between safety and the life Alina had fled. Alina walked beside me, her shoulders tense, her eyes scanning every hallway, every doorway, every man who walked by. Her hands trembled the entire time, even when she clenched them into fists. The bruise on her cheek had faded to yellow, but the fear behind her eyes was as dark as the day she arrived on my porch. She looked smaller without the weight of running, as if the courtroom itself was pressing down on her. When our names were called, I felt her grip my sleeve so tightly it nearly hurt. I didn't pull away. We stepped into the courtroom and faced the man who had broken her life apart. Leon sat at the defendant's table with a confidence so chilling it made the air feel heavier. He leaned back in his chair like he owned the room. His eyes flicked to the baby in my arms, then to Alina, and a thin, cruel smirk curved at the corner of his mouth. She flinched, turning her face away, but he watched her like a predator watching a trapped animal. The judge took her seat. The bailiff called for order. Alina's attorney stood first. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, someone who had seen too many women like Alina walk into too many rooms like this. She began laying out the evidence quietly, methodically. Hospital photographs, medical reports, witness statements, screenshots of text messages where Leon threatened Alina in ways that made the judge's eyebrows tighten. A shelter worker testified about the night Alina had arrived there bleeding and terrified. Even Devon came forward, voice shaking but steady enough to recount the weeks when Michael had tried to keep Alina safe. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, holding the baby close. The judge asked my name, my relationship to the child, and why I believed guardianship was necessary. My voice trembled at first, but then the truth found its footing. I am the emergency guardian listed on the birth certificate, I said. My son Michael signed my name there days before he died. He knew something was wrong. He told Alina to come to me if anything happened. I didn't understand why until... I swallowed, my eyes drifting briefly to Leon, whose smirk vanished the moment I mentioned Michael. Until the men he sent pounded on my door pretending to be child services. A ripple of reaction moved through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. You're saying the defendant sent individuals to impersonate state workers? Yes, I said. And they tried to force their way in. Alina's attorney presented the police report Mr. Griffin had filed. The judge read it silently, her expression tightening. Finally, it was Leon's turn to speak. And he unraveled. He denied everything too quickly. He claimed Alina had made it all up, too forcefully. He insisted he had a right to his son, too confidently. But his attorney couldn't hide the cracks. Not from the judge. Not from the room. Not from the truth. When pressed about the night Alina ran, his answers became inconsistent. When asked why he never filed a missing person report for the woman he supposedly loved, he stumbled. When confronted with the threatening messages, he claimed they were jokes. No one believed him. The final blow came when a nurse from the community clinic took the stand. She described the day Alina arrived early in her pregnancy, terrified, bruised, refusing help because she feared her abuser would find her through medical records. The nurse had documented everything. By the end of the hearing, Leon no longer leaned back in confidence. His jaw was tight, his eyes dark with anger, not fear of the law but fear of losing control. The judge delivered her ruling slowly, carefully, each word slicing through the tension like a knife. Temporary full protective order for Alina and the minor child. Immediate arrest of the defendant pending further investigation. Emergency guardianship granted to... She looked at me, her voice steady, firm, unmistakably final. The child's designated guardian. The gavel struck. The bailiff moved toward Leon. For the first time since the funeral, Alina exhaled without trembling. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear this time, but from a grief held too long and a freedom she had never dared to imagine. As the officers led Leon away, the baby stirred in my arms, stretching his tiny fingers as if waking from a long sleep. Alina reached out, touching his hand gently. "He's safe," she whispered, voice breaking. And for the first time I believed it too. The months that followed, the courtroom felt strangely quiet, almost fragile, like the world was trying to settle after too much shaking. The danger had loosened its grip, but its shadow still lingered in the corners of our days. Alina had been offered placement in a long-term protection program, a safe house in another city, a new identity, the chance to start over far from the memories that bruised her. It was everything she should have wanted, everything she once begged for. But when the time came, she said no. We sat at my kitchen table the morning the social worker arrived with the paperwork. The baby, now crawling clumsily across the floor, was babbling to himself as he chased a wooden spoon he'd adopted as a favorite toy. The sunlight spilled across the table, warming the bruises that had long faded from her skin but still lingered in the softer places of her mind. "I can't leave," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the spoon clattering against the linoleum. "Not him. Not you." Her voice trembled, not with fear this time, but with a kind of fragile certainty. "You're the first place that ever felt safe." The social worker said she understood, though the worry behind her eyes told another story. She warned Alina of the risks, the emotional whiplash that could come from trying to rebuild a life so close to where it fell apart. But in the end, she respected the decision. She filed the papers for alternative protection, regular check-ins, and quiet monitoring. No new names, no new faces. Just the beginning of a life rebuilt on steadiness rather than hiding. Alina didn't move out. Not completely. She found a small place 4 blocks away, a modest apartment above a bakery that smelled like warm bread every morning. But she was at my house nearly every day, sometimes with purpose, sometimes because she didn't know where else to be. She moved through our home gently, like a wounded bird learning to trust its own wings again. She helped with feedings, with laundry, with groceries. Sometimes she simply sat on the couch with a book she never actually read, content just to be somewhere quiet. The baby, my grandson in every way that mattered, grew faster than I'd been prepared for. He laughed easily, the kind of laugh that filled a room and demanded to be answered. He reached for both of us without hesitation, crawling into laps with equal affection. He learned to pull himself up by gripping our fingers, wobbling on unsteady legs, giggling every time he fell into our arms. Then came the day he took his first steps. It was a late afternoon in early spring. The windows were open, letting in a soft breeze that carried the smell of cut grass. Alina and I sat on the rug facing each other, only a few feet apart. The baby, our baby, was standing between us, gripping my hands for balance. His dark curls were damp with sweat from trying so hard to stay upright. I slowly let my fingers slip away. Alina held out her hands. "Come here, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with hope. For a moment he wobbled. His tiny feet shifted uncertainly. His brows furrowed in concentration. And then one step. Another. Third. His arms wiggled like a tiny bird attempting flight, and he fell forward into Alina's arms with a triumphant squeal. Her laughter broke open like sunlight, bright and unrestrained. She hugged him close, burying her face in his neck, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from fear or pain or exhaustion, but from pure joy. "He did it," she whispered. "He really did it." "We did it," I corrected softly, feeling something warm settle deep in my chest. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen once in all the months she'd been with us. Belonging. She wasn't a guest anymore. She wasn't a terrified stranger clutching her baby in the rain. She was family, not the kind formed by blood alone, but by everything that had nearly broken us, and everything that had held us together in spite of it. The baby reached for both of us then, tiny fingers stretched wide, as if trying to pull us closer. And in that small, simple moment I realized. This wasn't the life any of us expected. It was something better. The cemetery looked different in spring. Softer. The grass was greener than it had been the day of Michael's funeral, and tiny white flowers dotted the ground like quiet reminders that life grows even in places meant for endings. I hadn't been back since the day Alina placed the baby. Her baby, my grandson, into my arms and vanished into the fog. A year ago I had stood here alone, hollowed out by grief and regret. Today I wasn't alone. The baby, now steady enough on his feet to explore but still wobbly enough to keep us on edge, toddled ahead of us with clumsy enthusiasm. His little hands brushed the tops of the grass as if he were greeting each blade personally. Alina walked beside me, holding a small bouquet of blue forget-me-nots she'd chosen carefully at the florist that morning. Her steps were slow, reverent. The scar on her cheek had softened, and though the memories behind it hadn't disappeared, they no longer defined her. We approached Michael's headstone, simple and gray, engraved with his name and the dates that still hurt to look at. I swallowed hard as my fingers traced the letters. 1 year. An entire year without hearing his voice, without seeing him laugh, without wondering if today might be the day he called. Yet strangely, standing here now, I didn't feel the emptiness that had once lived so heavily in my chest. Something had shifted, quietly, gradually, over the last 12 months. The baby toddled toward the headstone and patted it clumsily with his palm, babbling something that sounded like a greeting only he understood. I felt tears prick my eyes at the sight. Michael would have adored him. He would have lifted him onto his shoulders, shown him every corner of the backyard he once ran through barefoot, taught him how to build wooden forts out of cardboard boxes. He would have been terrified of fatherhood and overwhelmed by it, but he would have tried, and that mattered. Alina knelt beside the headstone and placed the flowers gently on the grass. Her fingers lingered there, trembling just slightly. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering something I couldn't hear. Thank you, perhaps. Promise. Goodbye. When she stood again, there was a softness in her expression, not free of pain but free of the shame that once bound her. I took a slow breath and let my gaze drift between them, the child stumbling in tiny circles, the young woman who had lived a lifetime of fear in her tender years, the family that had been pieced together not by blood alone, but by survival, by love, by choices my son made in the dark. For so long I had believed Michael drifted away from me because he didn't need me, because he no longer cared, because I had somehow failed him. But looking at the baby tugging at the grass with chubby hands, I saw the truth Michael never got to tell me. He hadn't been abandoning me. He had been building something, protecting something, giving something to me that he couldn't carry himself. Alina stepped closer, her eyes soft. He saved us, she murmured. He nodded. He saved all of us. The baby waddled back toward me, arms raised, demanding to be held. I scooped him up, his warm cheek pressing against my shoulder. His small fingers curled into the fabric of my sweater, grounding me in a way I never expected a year ago. I looked at Michael's name again, the sunlight glinting off the stone, and felt a quiet certainty settle deep in my heart. My grief had shaped me, but it no longer owned me. It had opened a door instead, one I never would have walked through willingly, but one that led to a life fuller than I imagined possible. I leaned down, my voice barely above a whisper. He left me a family, not grief. The breeze moved through the trees gently, almost as if it carried an answer. And in that stillness, in that fragile, hopeful peace, I knew Michael had found a way to come home after all.